Inherited disorders. Inherited disorders. We have seen how errors in transcription and translation could lead to mutations. Here we will see how these may be passed on to offspring. Genetic disorders exist in every type of plant and animal. There are thousands of genetic disorders in humans alone. Some of these disorders are inherited as dominant or recessive traits controlled by a single gene. All of these disorders show simple inheritance patterns just like the traits in Mendels pea plants, because like in Mendels pea plants, the inherited disorders are caused by a single gene. You either have this single gene cause the mutation, or you do not. Recessive disorders. Many genetic disorders are inherited in a recessive manner. Recessively inherited disorders show up only in individuals who are homozygous for the allele. Carriers are heterozygous individuals who carry the recessive allele, but are phenotypically normal. Recessively inherited disorders. These recessively inherited disorders range in severity from relatively mild to life-threatening. An example of a recessive disorder that is relatively mild is albinism, in which there is a lack of pigmentation in the skin. Individuals with albinism have an increased risk of sunburn and skin cancer due to the lack of melanin, the pigment that absorbs UV radiation from the sun. An example of a life-threatening disorder is cystic fibrosis, which involves excess secretion of a very thick mucus from the lungs, pancreas, and other organs. This makes it much more difficult for an individual to breathe. Using Mendels laws, we can predict the percentage of affected children likely to result from a mating between two carriers. In this case, we have two parents that are heterozygous, big A, little a. And so, when we look at the Punnett square, they could have one individual who's normal, not a carrier, two individuals that are carriers, they have this recessive little a allele, and then one individual out of four, or a 25% chance of an individual being affected by this recessive disorder. They have two copies of the recessive allele, so they are affected. Genotypic and phenotypic ratios. Genotypically, 1 out of 4 of the offspring will have the chance of exhibiting the particular disorder. 1 out of 2 of the offspring will be carriers for the trait, while 1 out of 4 will be normal, a ratio of 1 to 2 to 1. Phenotypically, there is a 3 out of 4 or 75% chance that a child will not exhibit the disorder, a ratio of 3 to 1. Remember, this is the chance for each baby. This does not mean for all the children in the family. So if this family decides to have 4 children, it's unlikely that you'll see 1 normal, 2 carriers, and 1 affected. What's likely to happen is for each baby, it's a 25% chance that they will be affected, 50% chance that they'll be a carrier, and a 25% chance that they will be normal. Inbreeding. Matings between relatives can increase the probability of the appearance of a genetic disease. Such matings are called consanguineous matings, inbreeding. Con means with, sangue means blood, and us means pertaining to. An example of a recessively inherited disorder, the Fugates of Kentucky. Methemoglobinia is a recessive disorder characterized by the presence of higher than normal level of a chemical that blocks the oxygen absorption into the blood. So we're blocking that oxygen absorption into the blood, and as a result, this causes the tissues to turn blue. So the blood is a darker red, and more blue light is scattered from the blood vessels through the skin. The Fugates of Hazard, Kentucky, were a group of people who carried the gene for this recessive disorder. Additionally, they had numerous consanguineous marriages, resulting in many of the children who were tinted blue. So because there was this inbreeding, the recessive disorder was more common and therefore a higher likelihood that the children would actually come out blue. Other examples of recessive disorders. Albinism. Lack of pigmentation in skin, hair, and eyes. Cystic fibrosis. Excessive mucus in lungs, digestive tract, and liver increases susceptibility to infections. Death occurs in early childhood unless treated. Phenylketonuria, or PKU, accumulation of the amino acid phenylalanine in blood, which can lead to developmental and/or intellectual disabilities. Sickle cell disease. Abnormal hemoglobin leads to abnormally shaped red blood cells, can damage many tissues, and Tay-Sachs disease, accumulation of lipid or fat in brain cells leading to developmental and/or intellectual disabilities, blindness, and death in early childhood. Dominant disorders. Some human disorders are due to dominant alleles. One example is achondroplasia, a form of dwarfism that is lethal when homozygous for the dominant allele. An individual who is heterozygous is a carrier and is dwarfed because the mutated allele interferes with bone growth and development. One such carrier is the late actor David Rappaport, who lived with this condition, achondroplasia. Huntington's disease. Huntington's disease is a dominant degenerative disease of the nervous system. The disease has no obvious phenotypic effects until about 35 to 40 years of age. This is beneficial for the genes, as by that point, most people with the disease will have unknowingly passed the genes on to their offspring.